recorded. So it's great to see so many of you. Yeah, Arity is just connecting from Kiribati. So I think we have definitely quorum from the Pacific Islands, or from, in fact, CCNSWAP overall here. So we have, I think, colleagues from Tonga, Solomon Island, New Zealand, Australia, United States, Samoa, Cook Islands, as well as Kiribati. So we welcome all to this meeting of the Codex Roundtable for the Southwest Pacific. This is, in fact, now becoming more of a regular gathering, and we're really trying now this approach that we agreed to during the CCNSWAP meeting, but also previously when we met in New Zealand, to have, to the extent possible, some preparatory meetings prior to important committees for the region, and CCCF is one of them. This is a proposed agenda that I believe I shared with you earlier. And we could potentially start with a roll call, introduction. It would be still good. I think we have Ken Lowry from the US Codex Office, whom I'm sure you know and you've met in a number of meetings, whether be it colloquiums or Codex committee meetings. But perhaps just so that everybody knows everybody, we do a quick introduction. So I'm going to start very quickly. Samuel Godefroy, working on the Southwest Pacific Codex Initiative, the initiative funded by the US Codex Office and implemented in partnership with Codex Australia and Codex New Zealand. Who wants to go next? I see I see Jocelyn next, or okay, go ahead, Scott.
I'll jump in. Hi, everyone. Scott Mersch from Codex Australia. Nice to see you all.
Let me jump in as soon as you introduce me. So as Sam said, I'm Ken Lowry from the US Codex Office. I'm the Senior International Issues Analyst. And basically, I'm in charge of outreach for the United States and devising these programs around the world. So
I can come in. I'm Jaislyn. I'm with Solomon Islands. I'm with Mark. He's the CCP, but unfortunately, he won't be able to join in. But yeah, so I'm with the laboratory here in the Solomons, part of the NCC.
Great to have you.
Yeah, might as well go. Hi everyone. I'm Annalise from Tonga. So I work here in our food division as our senior agricultural officer, and our CCP is still Dr. Vilam Manu, which is our CEO, but I'm helping out, carrying out his role as part of the member for Codex. So nice to meet you all.
Thank you.
Hello everyone. My name is Max Lilo. I'm the alternate Codex contact point for Samoa, and also the alternate secretariat for our Samoa National Codex Committee. Our CCP is Mr. Roger Tuliafo, but he's not here right now due to some other work commitments. But I think he will be joining us soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mary, if I can jump in, sorry. It is C. Simeon, the TCP for Kiribati and Director for Public Health. Pleasure to meet you again, and Mary, CCNSWAP members. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Kia ora. I guess I can jump in now. My name is SWP Ruth. I'm with New Zealand MPI. I think my colleague Lisa is normally the representative in this meeting, but I did want to note that I represent New Zealand on the contaminants, Codex contaminants meeting. So yeah, nice to meet everyone. Thank you.
Great to have you with us. Thank you, Ruth. We continue our roundtable introductions. So Cook Islands, you're next.
My name is Gatoko, and I'm the National Contact Codex Point, and we with the the Ministry of Agriculture. And also we've set it out that the chair is also our CEO, which consists of the Minister of Health, Foreign Affairs, Marine Resources, and did I miss someone? And the Chamber of Commerce. Yes, yeah. It's just that I missed the meeting in Fiji because of the flooding in Auckland. But anyway, good to see you. And I met some of you in Auckland last year, and yeah, look forward to our meeting. This nice weather here in our country, and hope the same in your paradise.
Thank you. Great to have you with us.
Happy.
Thank you. And I think Susanna joined us from Fiji. Susanna, please. Susanna, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you, Mr. Samuel. Bulavinaka, and hello again to all my dear colleagues from all the respected region. Apologies for myself joining in late. So everyone knows me by Susanna. You can call me Sue. I always step in when the regional coordinator is also occupied with other work duty. So, but my role here in the National Codex Committee, I'm a principal officer here for the principal economic officer for the agriculture trade and at the Ministry of Agriculture in Fiji, and we look after trade facilitation and all. And for the National Codex Committee, I stand in as the co-chair and also my team as the secretariat. Naka.
Well, thank you and welcome all. I think we have 9 countries of CCNASWA present, which is, I think, a great level of attendance for this Codex Roundtable. So we have an agenda that was circulated earlier. Today's meeting is really an attempt for us to discuss some of the agenda items of CCCF16, so the Codex Committee on Contaminants in Food. In our previous discussions, both in Auckland, but also in Fiji, this committee was identified as one of the committees of importance to the region. Now, I understand that many of you may not be able to attend this meeting in person because this meeting is going to be, a physical meeting with the potential participation in the form of broadcast. So essentially, those who are attending virtually will not have the opportunity to contribute, but nonetheless, I think it's the committee meeting discussions are important enough for us to go through some level of analysis of the agenda items, and this also can pave the way for future more planned participation and more effective participation from the region, and hopefully more and more we will be reflecting the concerns of the regions or the priorities of the region more as part of the discussion of the committee. So that's really the key element. And if we have some time, we can also discuss any type of output stemming from the last CCNASWAP meeting and any proposed next steps for our coordination efforts under these Codex Roundtables. So we plan approximately between an hour and an hour and a half of discussions. And hopefully we'll cover all this. Now, for today's discussions related to CCCF16, we are adopting the approach that we discussed earlier. Basically, one volunteer country or more would be working with us in terms of looking at the agenda and preparing some aspects of the discussion, basically as part of a process where we are accompanying more and more the Codex contact points to better be acquainted with agendas of Codex committee meetings and basically take the lead on behalf of the rest of the Southwest Pacific community in really sharing how the agenda was analyzed and what are the items of relevance for the region that are to be watched for the committee discussions. And in fact, that volunteer for today is Annalise from Tonga. So Annalise and I worked actually on preparing a couple of presentations that were shared with you earlier. So you received the PDF of those. But of course, when we are going to be discussing these, feel free, of course, to intervene and to give your country position if you wish, also to ask others for their positions, or also to discuss any item of relevance to your jurisdiction. I will be sharing the presentation, and basically we will be sharing the presentation between Annalise and myself. Annalise, you're comfortable enough to start?
Thank you, Sam. Yes, I just turned off my camera to achieve a better bandwidth. Yes. Okay, yeah. Thank you. I think I'll start now. And thank you, everyone, and apologize again for the minor changes before we start. As you can see, just the structure of the analysis. We'll just touch on the introduction of the proposed codex text and just looking at the analysis, and then look at the conclusion and recommendation. Next slide, please.
This is just a general disclaimer, so.
Yes, just as a disclaimer that this is just an analysis, so it's not indicative of our official positions. For the 16th session of the Codex Committee on Contaminants in Food, note that it will be a little different than usual, since we know most meetings usually finish on a Friday, and they adopt the report. But this time they will use the 18th to the 21st of April for the physical plenary meeting, and then dedicate a virtual meeting for the adoption on the 26th of April. Next slide, please. And of course, some countries, the countries who do not attend in person will not be allowed to participate on the virtual adoption, since they do not physically contribute, hence cannot make any statements. The items listed here, as you all can see, are some of the items selected, which may and are relevant to the region. And I think for today, me and Sam might just touch on 3 items for today. So item 2 are the matters referred to by the Codex Alimentarius Commission, as a reminder. And on item 5, which is based on the lead. This is important as it is a huge public concern. And it is an environmental contamination. So based on JECFA's assessment, any level on lead is essentially problematic. So there is no safe level, hence there's a need to reduce it. And item 6 will touch on the code of practice for the prevention and reduction of mycotoxin contamination in cassava. This is of interest to the region, as we know some of our countries export and import cassava. And so also, if you guys can see item 7, looking at sampling plans for total aflatoxin in certain cereals and cereal-based products. Item 8 is on the maximum level for total aflatoxins in ready-to-eat peanuts and associated sampling plan. Item 9 is on the maximum levels for total aflatoxin and ochratoxin in some spices. And 10 will be on the prevention or reduction of Sequoia poisoning. And of course, item 16 is looking at the priority list of contaminants, which we know we have scopolamine. We asked for scopolamine to be in the priority list. So yeah, these are some of the items, but I think for today, me and Sam will be looking at just 3 items. Next slide, please. So looking at the committee decisions, last year, the committee adopted a code of practice for the prevention and the reduction of cadmium in cocoa. So as previously mentioned, these are the key decisions made by the commission. They've also adopted maximum limits for cadmium in cocoa, which is cocoa powder, which is the 100% of cocoa solids based on the dry matter. It was adopted at step 5.8. They also adopted the maximum levels for lead in other food products last year. So in fact, this year, there will be a continuation of some discussions on those in cereal-based foods for infants and young children, which was adopted in step 5.8. They've also adopted maximum levels for some mercury level in eel and pink eel at step 5.8 as well. Next slide, please. Continuation of the adoptions, they also adopted maximum levels for aflatoxin for maize grain and other products based on the maize and cereal-based foods. They've also looked at amendments of the maximum levels for deoxyvalinol in cereal-based foods for infants and young children, and this was after the implementation of the code of practice. They also adopted the maximum levels for lead in ready-to-eat meals for the infants and young children, adopted in step 5. So there is a want to continue the discussions for those. They also looked at the code of practice for cassava, which was adopted in step 5. And now there will be continued discussion at step 6, at 6 and 7. Next slide, please. So basically, the recommendations from Codex Alimentarius Commission, basically there was a push to submit data to the GEMS food database because JACFA cannot do its job without the data, and hence the committee cannot do its job without that data. They've also discussed, there was also a discussion of new food sources and production systems and looking at how to address these through the Codex mechanism. And basically the commission requested reports from the various committees if there are issues in this area, like the new food sources and production system, which cannot be dealt with in the context with the existing Codex structures. For the 60th anniversary of the Codex, there was encouragement and people highlighted that, and as we all know, we did that last year in our last CC NASWAP meeting, in which we highlighted the 60th anniversary of the Codex. And lastly, there was discussion basically on the inclusion of arsenic and scopolamine in the priority list under agenda item 16. Next slide. Yes, I think I will leave it off to Sam to take the lead on this one. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks very much, Annalise. So essentially, as was discussed by Annalise, the other item I think of importance to the region, but also globally, is the ongoing discussion on maximum limits for lead in certain foods. Now, there are a number of items that are being discussed at step 4. So essentially, this is one of the, in fact, the first time that the committee is discussing them, and others that were adopted last year at step 5, and that they have been circulated for comments at 6, and now the committee will be considering them at step 7. So again, as was mentioned by Annalise, lead is an important chemical contaminant that is found in the environment, and the environmental contamination may lead to contamination of food. So essentially, we are seeing quite a bit of exposure coming from food sources, and the general risk management approach is an approach that is based on the ALARA principle, meaning as low as reasonably achievable, and also with an emphasis on reduction of point source introduction. So essentially any reservoir of lead should be avoided, and that's why in a lot of instances a number of regulatory requirements impose to eliminate lead from any type of tool for food production. And we can essentially support these efforts with the adoption of maximum levels that are there to help verify, if you will, the effectiveness of some of these reduction measures. So again, the MLs are only one additional tool that is there as part of the arsenal of risk management. And Codex has been working on this for some time now. This is a reminder of the committee's main decisions during the previous session as it relates to lead. Now, the list for which Codex started considering the development of these maximum levels was actually quite big, and that got reduced to a certain extent last year. Discontinuation of work on fresh eggs, on dried garlic, and also on molasses due to insufficient data to establish a maximum level. There were some items that were adopted, as was mentioned earlier by Annalise. So at step 5.8, so 0.02 ppm was adopted for cereal-based foods for infants and young children. A value of 0.1 ppm was adopted for white and refined sugar, corn syrup, maple, and honey. And in fact, right now, what the committee will be considering will be the unrefined sugar sources, so essentially to complement these values. And also there was the adoption of 0.1 ppm for sugar-based candies. Now, as was mentioned, the committee will be looking at separate MLs for brown and raw sugar. Now, these are considered to be commodities of high value, and they are being traded internationally. So that's why these MLs would be of interest for Codex to develop, and they will be complementary to the levels that were adopted for the processed products or the refined products. The committee will also be continuing the discussion on a possible ML for ready-to-eat meals for infant and young children. There was the adoption of a value of 0.02 ppm at step 5, but again, the electronic working group was asked to continue considering this ML with a study of the impact on certain foods that may not be able to achieve this level. And in fact, the committee decided to re-establish the electronic working group, which was led by Brazil. This year, the focus will be on ready-to-eat meals for infant and children, also on these unrefined sugars, so brown and raw sugar. But also there is a mandate to consider next year some maximum levels for culinary herbs and spices. Now, what the committee will be looking at is some suggestions that came from the electronic working group. And these suggestions are a value of 0.15 milligram per kilogram for the unrefined sugars. For the ready-to-eat meals for infant and young children, there are a couple of options that the working group came up with. Either to look at adopting a value of 0.02 milligram per kilogram for all, or potentially to consider to have some exclusion of products that are unable to meet the 0.02, and to consider potentially 0.03 for these products. I note that there is in fact just a mistake in it was basically the reverse. The values to be excluded would concern mostly products containing grain that were found not to be meeting or not to be to be able to achieve. When I say not to be able to achieve, this is on the basis of a rejection rate that was considered by the committee, which is essentially a 5% rejection rate. And this brings me to really summarize very briefly the approach that was followed by the electronic working group. Mostly the electronic working group looked at the data that was made available in the GEMS food database, looked at also the way food categories were classified. So for example, for sugars, they tried to make them simple. So essentially there were so many ways that sugar were listed, and they tried to put some categories together to come up with only 3 categories that were left there. So classifying foods, and of course, following the ALARA principle as a guiding principle, looking at a rejection rate that would be at 5 or below 5%. And the approach also that was used was to consider that when essentially you have an LOQ or an LOD, we would be considering that this, well, when you have a 0, when you have something that is not detected or not quantified, we will be considering this finding as being the LOQ or the LOD, which is essentially the upper bound approach. Now, the electronic working group also worked on the data in such a way that they excluded data that were available in the database where essentially the finding was determined using a methodology whose LOQ or LOD was in fact higher than the value of the ML proposed. So this is really in an attempt to look at data that was generated with methods that are sensitive enough, essentially to be able to achieve the proposed LOD or the proposed, sorry, maximum level. So this is where we're at right now. The proposal here is to look at whether the maximum level that is recommended by the electronic working group, which is a single maximum level for all raw and untreated sugar, so all these categories at 0.15 milligram per kilogram, but also to look at this option for the ready-to-eat meals for infants and young children, and to see whether we can adopt 0.02 milligrams per kilogram, so 0.02 ppm, knowing that some items, essentially the grain-containing foods, would be exceeding the 5% rejection rate. So this is, a discussion point, and it would be great to see the positions of the different countries on this item. Maybe I'll pause here, and maybe Ruth, I think actually Lisa advised us that you would be providing us also with the analysis that New Zealand did. If you don't mind actually giving also your analysis or your opinion about this one.
No, thank you. I guess with this particular topic, it was initially a bit of a, quite a bit of interest in New Zealand, just because we've had a couple of lead contamination issues with sugar. But in terms of like our positions with regards to the ML proposals that are being put forward, I think we're quite comfortable with the proposal for the 0.15 milligrams per kilogram for all raw and untreated sugar products. I think one thing that we sort of had to balance was, of course, we looked at the results for lead in these products that we had tested in New Zealand, but we also had to consider obviously the practicality of being able to test at the border, because obviously that's something that we have to factor in when we are coming to an agreement on a position. So again, we would have perhaps have gone with a lower limit, but we had to sort of balance that with the practicalities of those who are doing the testing and the analysis. So our front of line staff. In regards to the single ML for the ready-to-eat meals for infants and young children, I think that because there was a virtual working group for this particular agenda item just last night, and I think it's still being put forward for discussion at plenary next week. There isn't any sort of firm agreement on whether people are okay with the 0.15 0.02 or a higher limit. So I'd be interested in seeing where that lands next week. And I guess one thing that was being cited was obviously the ML that was adopted last year and put forward towards the this maximum level, which is 0.0.
Am I the only one, or we're losing you, Ruth?
I think we're losing her.
Yeah, we're losing her on my end too.
Okay, so I think we heard at least that, you know, there seems to be more concurrence on the 0.15, even though a lower level would be favored. But here there are some discussions. But again, having adopted, the committee adopted something similar last year related to cereal-based foods for infants and young children. So this was the cereal-based ones. And this is the category, at least the grain-based category seems to be the one that seems to be not achieving the rejection rate of 5%. Basically, you go at a higher rejection rate if you consider 0.02. 0.03 would get us to the 5%. And this is the topic of discussion. So it would be interesting to see other countries' positions on this one.
Let me throw in, just from the US point of view now, I'll put a caveat. I don't go to this committee. I don't know the subject. So I'm just reading what the US position is, right? I'm not an expert in this area. So we agree with everything on the sugars except for Mascavo, because it's not a common name for panela. And there was no data on Mascavo were reported in the GEMS food. So we're concerned about that they have for Mascavo. On the cereals ones, the United States does not support excluding products containing cereals from the proposal of the ML of 0.02 milligrams a kilogram for ready-to-eat meals for infants and young children, given that Codex established an ML of 0.2 milligram per kilogram for cereal-based foods for infants and young children in 2022.
Which is what is written here. So
which
yes.
is what they're saying. So that's one thing the delegate will raise.
Okay.
They're also asking to clarify in the plenary whether the ML for ready-to-eat meals applies to single ingredient foods such as carrots and apples,
okay,
in addition to multi ingredient foods. And then they question the analysis as well, why they went with a 95% percentile on sugars, with the LOQ greater than ML of 0.2 for the ready-to-eat meals. They're saying that this approach should be considered further by the electronic working group, which maybe they did last night, based on the guidance on data analysis for the development of maximum levels, improved data collection in Codex before CCCF endorses the approach for future work. So that's the US position as I understand it. And again, I'm no expert in this area.
No, this is no, definitely. Thank you very much. I think Ken, that summarizes it very nicely. I think there is a similar concern from a number of countries about this exclusion element, and I think also the methodology that was used by the electronic working group with the exclusion of some data seems to have been really raising some concern from a number of delegations, because it was not the general methodology that was adopted in previous analysis. So that's what we can say at this point. Any other points that any other country would like to raise for this one?
Just on, can I just ask a silly question?
No silly questions, Scott.
So
no silly questions. There's no such
on
thing.
on the yeah, so where we're sort of saying they'd set the same value previously for cereal-based foods for infants. Am I right in thinking that with this sort of ML, because there is no safe level and it's based on ALARA, that so they don't take into account dietary exposure and that kind of thing in this. So I guess where I'm going with this is, like, there might be other instances where with other MLs where you would say, okay, ready to eat meals or something maybe incorporates a larger group of foods or something, and therefore maybe there's a difference between what they set for cereal-based foods and maybe ready-to-eat meals or something. But in this instance, that wouldn't make sense. Does my question make sense?
No, I think I understand your question. I guess the cereal-based foods is a definitely broad category. You know, it encompasses, and actually cereal-based foods also, there might be even questions about you know, what is the percentage of cereal? You see, in this particular case, the way when they did the analysis of the data, and here I'm really telling you based on my reading of the material, okay, and because there was quite a bit of material, believe me, on this one, it was a huge set of information that was available. The categorization of products was a little bit different because basically here they focused on ready-to-eat meals, okay? So it's a very focused category. What they found is that the subcategory of ready-to-eat meals for infants and young children that was grain-based was not possible to meet it. When I say meet it, meet what? Meet the criteria set by the committee, which is 5% of rejection. Basically, they were, I think, closer to 8%, like a higher level of percentage of rejection, okay? But then actually, when you think of grain-based, you know, ready-to-eat meals, basically there was a question as to how much of these grain-based are cereal-based. You know, so because in the grain-based, a lot of them are cereal-based. So essentially, when we think of that, is that some of these are part of the category that was adopted last year. So it may be the fact that of not achieving the 5% is also related to the way the data was skewed, the data was treated. You know what I mean? So in this particular case, the question was, should we exclude the grain-based that are not able to meet the 5% rejection rate? Or should we still try to have a 0.02 and see essentially what the impact of that will be? And apparently, most of the comments that we're having is this exclusion doesn't necessarily make sense. That I think the 0.02 should be considered, particularly on the basis of what we said, which is that lead has no safe level, and we're trying to push ALARA in this particular case. There doesn't seem to be any data that is robust enough to say that this will pose an important element for international trade, because it's only based on that analysis of the electronic working group on data that is as complete as people submitted. So the data is also could be skewed, you know. So this is where the discussion will be. Now, I mean, it's anybody's guess where this discussion will go. You know, if we get consensus on moving with 5.8 to move to 8, because this one is at step 5 already. So it could go to 8 if essentially we get consensus. It could also potentially be left at the same level and maybe ask for more data or a different way of analyzing the data, and essentially come back to it next year. Given that we're not done with lead, next year we will be bringing back lead in this committee. The committee will be considering the spices and culinary herbs for NML. So the topic is not closed. So these are the two options here, and we're going to be seeing how the discussions go next week.
Thank you.
Now, I guess for the region, though, there are a couple of recommendations that we're making, in fact, here. And they're not really related to the MLs themselves. I think it's very important that the region looks at its current data. What do we have from the Southwest Pacific Islands right now in terms of the data that is available for sale, and looking at what are the monitoring programs doing in order to identify the levels of lead in foods amongst those that Codex is proposing levels. And I think it's also important that competent authorities engage with the production sector to document the potential impacts of these MLs. I believe for the most part, the products that we're talking about are imported products in the Pacific Islands. So not necessarily produced locally. But nonetheless, I think having that type of information will be useful. And having that information reflected in the GEMS food database will also allow JECFA to make its assessments, or the electronic working group to make its assessment, taking into account the realities of the region. So this is a general recommendation that he's made. Ruth, now that you're back with us, any other comments from your end?
Apologies for that. I think it might be my internet connection. I'm working from home. No, nothing to add, but yeah, definitely agree with the, I guess the questions that keep coming up is obviously the way that the commodity has been categorized, as well as I guess, yeah, some issues with the way that the data has been analyzed. And I guess to come now to your point about, obviously looking at what data is available within the South, West Pacific region, I can see how the importance of, being able to input into the database is of value. I know from a New Zealand perspective, we definitely do try and look out for, I guess, any future agenda items or, things that are of interest to the committee or to JECFA to input data into the database. And so, for example, I guess we try to also incorporate where there is, I guess, South Pacific products that are coming into New Zealand. We do try and flag that with, I guess, our trading partners that, oh, look, these are the detections that we got. And we are looking to obviously share this on the database, and it is anonymized, so it won't be necessarily,
right,
linked, but yet tracked back to that particular producer. But yeah.
Thank you for that, Ruth.
All good.
So if there are no more questions or comments on this one, we would be ready to move to the next item that was identified of priority for our region. And this is the code of practice for the reduction of mycotoxin contamination in cassava and cassava-based products. And as introduced by Annalise earlier, this item is being considered at step 7 by the committee. And I think, Annalise, you're going to be making the continuation of this presentation, right?
Yes. Yep. Thank you, Sam. Yes, I will continue with this item. And as Sam already mentioned, this is already at step 7. So most of everything has already been agreed to in this draft. Next slide, please. So there's a bit of statistics here. We just want to look at the consumption volume and the imports and exports of cassava in the region. So if we look at the tons produced in the region, such as that in Australia and Oceania, that's a pretty significant number over there. Fiji also shows a very high amount of its consumption value. And if we look into Papua New Guinea, they've also showed a really significant amount as well. So I think this highlights where we can see who's going to be mostly impacted with this item on cassava. So with New Zealand, the values shows in terms of consumption and import values are also significant as well. Next slide, please. Yeah. So this analysis was done on the basis of a market size. Though it is a bit old, it shows Papua New Guinea, Fiji, and Micronesia, and also Tonga, to an extent that the production size is to be significant. Next slide, please. When we look at exports,
you want me to move to exports? This is exports.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so when we look at exports, Fiji and Tonga shows here to be very big exporters of cassava, and So as I mentioned, this is important to know who might be impacted by this. Yes, next slide, Sam, please. For the imports here, we see that Australia and New Zealand are two of the most cassava import countries. And I think I may assume that it's because of most of our relatives are there as well, among others as well. Yes, next slide, please. So just a brief introduction on cassava. Cassava is a good food alternative. It is local and indigenous to some countries, and it is gluten-free and classified as a low glycemic index food. So it is attractive to some of the food nutritionists out there. It is also a good food source alternative for people with celiac disease. Next slide, please. For cassava, there are two types of considerations, which are the cassava peel, usually given as animal feed, so the brown stuff over there, and the white stuff inside, or what we call the cassava meat, which is used for the human consumption. So there was a highlight that this item is focusing on the part for human consumption. Yep. Next slide, please. And here are some derivatives of the cassava used for food: cassava desserts, cassava bread, cassava flour, cassava chips. I'm sure some of you have already had some of these. Next slide, please. So why is this an issue, and why it needs a code of practice? Basically, some total diet studies showed that aflatoxin and ochratoxin frequently found in cassava and in cassava-derived food. So they decided to discuss for a code of practice to be developed. And this was approved in CAC 44 as new work. And basically it was clarified in 2021 that we are not dealing with the feed, but the white stuff. In CCCF16, there was the advancement of the code of practice to step 5, adopted at step 5 as a draft standard, and now it is coming back to the committee as at step 7 for consideration. Next slide, please. So what the code of practice provides, it looked at the good agricultural practices. It also looked at the good manufacturing practices. It looked at good storage practices and also good distribution practices. Next slide, please. What they try to see is where can we apply the best practices. They look at types of processes and conditions required. Are there critical parameters which can be applied to better control the occurrence of mycotoxin? Are there storage conditions that can reduce the growth of mycotoxin? And of course, they also looked at education and personal hygiene measures as well. So this is the structure of the code of practice for cassava. Next slide, please. Some of, so majority of the comments received, people were supportive of the code of practice, and some suggested to add human consumption to the title. This is from Thailand. EU suggested that we should not be considering only for aflatoxin reduction and ochratoxin, but we should also include fumonisin as well. However, there are some debate on this because there doesn't seem to be significant occurrence of fumonisin in cassava. So there's a need for confirmation for this. Some suggested to have a review of the classification of bitter and sweet cassava roots according to the current classification of cassava in the codex. Next slide, please. Yeah, so I think this is where we need to identify if this is something that is already practiced by the industry of the region. So we can look at the recommendations for the Southwest Pacific. Do we consider this to be good for the industry of the region as well? If yes, we can consider to support the adoption of the draft at step 8. But there's a need to analyze whether our producers in the region are following these practices. So yes, I think that's the end of the slide for this one, Sam. Am I right?
Yes, that's this is the last slide. Absolutely. So we are really at the end here. I mean, again, based on the comments that were received, as Annalise indicated, it seemed that the document was technically sound, and the overwhelming level of comments seems to support really moving ahead with this one. But again, given that the region is one of the producing regions, if there are any things that may need to be considered, even though, again, at this stage, it's kind of quite late to be involved in with some changes because we are already at step 7. So basically, most of the standard has been approved, given that it was approved as a draft standard at step 5. But nonetheless, there is still an opportunity to make comments at the committee, including through a CRD, an introduction of a CRD, or any type of comments that could be developed right now. So maybe we'll pause here a few minutes, and I don't know if others. Thanks very much, Annalise, for this great review, and Ruth, Scott, Ken, colleagues from all other jurisdictions, if you have any comments on this item.
I guess I could make a quick comment. Thanks, Annalise. That was a great overview of this agenda item. I think for us, really, obviously it's near the end, but I mean, my colleague, we're a team of 2 for this contaminant committee meeting. We would welcome any, obviously, feedback, because we aren't aware of what this would mean in practice for the producers, and so I think any insights into, I guess, the feasibility of some of these things happening in your regions would be really helpful.
Yeah, and the United States has a similar position. I mean, we feel this can go for final adoption. The delegate must make a few comments, they normally do, unless, of course, our friends in the Pacific have a problem with it. So, but otherwise, we're fine with it.
Sorry. Just adding a comment. I think for us here in Tonga, because we're our cassava export is currently literally happening outside here in our pack house, and for us, just moving it to step 8 would also be a good thing, because it's good to have something on paper that we can look into when we do our exports. So yeah, thank you.
Okay, so this is great. If there are no other comments, I think these were really the items. Yeah, I see that Eresi is also mentioning no major comments from Kiribati. Just continuing to support the ongoing work on this. So thanks, thank you, Kiribati, for that input. So again, I mean, the agenda item of CCCF is much larger than this. We've selected really these items simply, for the time. I mean, this is also our first attempt to do an analysis of the agenda items as a Codex Roundtable for the Southwest Pacific. hopefully in upcoming discussions, we'll be able to review the agenda even more, and even actually more ahead of time, knowing that now the committee is taking place next week. But again, this gives you an idea about the way we can tackle some of these items. Next week, there will be other items also that will be subject to consideration. There are some discussions around basically sampling plans and maximum levels for mycotoxins in spices that will be continuing. There, I think actually from the cursory review of the information, I think essentially the maximum level seems to be, for the most part, okay to suggest, but there might be some questions about the sampling plans. I mean, I don't know if you are sampling, if you're having spices and you're proposing to sample 10 kilograms of something that costs a fortune, I think it might be causing some issues for international trade. But these are things that might be, you know, subject to discussion. I guess I looked at those even from just a common sense standpoint, if you will, not even actually from a statistical overview there. So there are a few things that will be subject to debate. So it's generally not a boring committee, let's put it this way. But then again, I'm biased because I'm a chemist.
Yeah, same here as Sam. Like, I was just a few. I think I already asked you that question when we were in Auckland, with the you know how we always go with the heavy metals and mycotoxins, especially in ready-to-eat foods. But there are the principles and guidelines for microbiological criteria. We like Codex do not really use that, or I've been reading that, but I'm not really sure. Like I tried because we do the test here, but like when it comes to microbiology tests, it's a bit complicated when I try to read the guidelines, especially for microtest.
Okay. I guess, I mean, the risk management approaches are slightly, I mean, you're using general principles that are the same, but there are still principles that are geared more to manage the biological agents as hazards. And basically the difference is the fact that a biological agent is not something that is static, it's dynamic, it can continue to grow. It is actually much more influenced by the process than chemicals. Not that chemicals are not influenced, they can be, and particularly mycotoxins. You know, when you do some processing, you may have some changes on the occurrence or the prevalence of the hazard. But for biologics, definitely the process will have an impact, because depending on whether you apply an inactivation approach, etc.
Yeah.
So essentially the risk assessment is a little bit different when you conduct it for microbiology than when you conduct it for chemistry, and that's why you have different risk management approaches that can be applicable. Now, that being said, for microbiology as well, even though you rely on numbers much less than you do for chemistry, you may have what we call sentinel levels, and Codex has established some values that could be used in order to basically control some biological agents. The example is what Codex developed for listeria in ready-to-eat foods, and and basically some values that would be considered for listeria, growth promoting products versus non-listeria growth promoting products, because depending on the food, you have different types of environment. So Codex still did some of that, but again, given that the agent has different characteristics, the risk assessment is different, therefore the risk management approach would somewhat differ. And that's, of course, that's what the Committee on Food Hygiene does. So the Committee on Food Hygiene does a lot, really, prevention approaches. So we focus a lot on how to prevent either the introduction or the proliferation of the biological agent.
All right. Yeah, I think it's kind of clear, because like most of the food, like for example, cassava, like there's heavy metals already contained in them. So, I think I understand. Yeah. All right. Thank you, Sam.
Not a problem. Thank you, Jocelyn. Okay, I think with that we have ended this item of the agenda. Now we have a few minutes left, and basically the next item to discuss is what we are going to be doing next. Any type of next steps that we want to discuss for our roundtable. And particularly now, I guess, if we are simply talking about the committees, the Codex committees, and what we are working on in order to prepare for the committees, the upcoming committee is CCFix. It's not that far away. It's just 3 weeks away, I guess, Scott, and even less, right?
Yeah, it's a little bit less. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just over 2 weeks.
So I don't know actually how we want to handle the preparation for this one. And do we have an idea about the level of participation from the region into CCFix?
Well, I know that Timothy from Vanuatu is registered, but I haven't heard whether he has been able to get approval to come down. We're hoping that he will. I thought I saw that Natoko from Cook Islands was registered, but I just can't remember whether that was for physical participation or if that was going to be virtual. But I don't think anyone else is coming. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes, Scott, Cook Island registered, but we're waiting for the physical to attend CCFix, and we made our request to place a plus for Assistant Farmer Plus, actually. So
Yep.
we're waiting for that. There's no response from the office yet.
Okay.
Yeah. But we did register ourselves online just
Yep.
to register the meeting. Yes.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Good. Well, I hope it comes through and we get to see you in Hobart in a couple of weeks.
And in terms of anyone else wants to comment on the participation level? If not, I guess maybe now we can comment on how we plan to prepare for it, because this is the list that actually Lisa put together previously as a guide for the way we're preparing for committees. And in fact, here, Scott, look who's there.
Looky. All right.
But again, I mean, knowing how busy you are with the preparations, you know, we could collaborate in preparing something, because obviously under the initiative funded by our good friends from the United States, we are doing the analysis of this agenda item, of these agenda items for CCFix. So depending on how we want to do it, we could combine, you know, like we could have a presentation similar to this one. And essentially,
that would be great.
Yeah, we can prepare that.
That would be great, because yeah, if I was to do the presentation, it wouldn't be anything as pretty as that. You'd just have to listen to me talking. So I think that would be a good, yeah.
I don't guarantee that it's going to be pretty, Scott, but that's okay. You know?
Well, there's going to be one. So.
Okay, well, and basically, then we could have a presentation ready. If essentially one country wants to volunteer for coaching purposes, just like what we did with Tonga, we can do that. And actually, Annalise reminded me in the chat that Samoa and Solomon Island also volunteered to be part of the coaching approach for CCCF, and we can continue that on an ongoing basis. Because then, you know, we can see what the committee did and the outputs, and we will be bringing this back to the roundtable. And those countries who want to be involved, you know, they can continue to do so. But for CCFix, if there are volunteers that I can work with, I will be more than happy to do that. Knowing that you won't be working only with me, I will be supported by another colleague from the initiative. Dr. Silvia Dominguez from our group will be actually supporting me in the preparation of the material for this one.
Maybe maybe Natoko is interested, seeing as he might be attending the meeting. Can I be cheeky and
Gatoko, would you like to be
suggest that?
involved in the
Yes.
preparation?
Yes,
Okay.
Samuel and
Okay,
Scott.
great.
Yep.
So
Everyone will be interested.
perfect. So what we will do then is just for us to maybe schedule a date where we could have our prep meeting. And this date could be potentially either the 26th or the 27th. I mean, we're going to do it just a week before because, I mean, we will need some time for the material to be prepared and also for some coaching purposes with, I guess, with Cook Islands, with Gatoko, you know, with to work with you so that we can prepare the material. Is there a date on the week before, so 25th, 26th, 27th, where you think is more suitable for you so that we can tentatively set the date?
I think 26 will be.
26?
Yeah.
Could we do 26 morning? Maybe 9 a.m. Canberra time? Would that be acceptable?
I know.
Okay, so tentatively we're setting 9 a.m. Canberra time on the 26th. It's going to be actually more civilized for me because I'm going to be in China, so so close enough in timelines, in time zones, and then I will be working with you, Gatoko, for the preparation of the material as of next week.
Okay. Yeah. Cheers. Yeah. Thank you.
Excellent. Okay, so I think that tackles our most immediate action for the next committee meeting. Now I'm going to actually throw it back to everybody if you have any additional points or comments that you would like to make.
Yeah, just one. Thank you, Annalise. Sam, would love to be coached too, especially for CCCF. Thank you.
Thank you. That's great. Thank you, Jaslyn. Well, if there are no more points, maybe Susanna, as the coordinator for the region, any points that you would like to make in conclusion? I don't know if Susanna can hear us. Maybe not.
She's multitasking. She's probably got 2 phones in her ear. And
okay, and any concluding remarks from anybody?
Hey, thank you very much, Sam, for organising this again. It's always really helpful, and thank you, Ruth, for coming in and sharing your insights. And for everyone else joining, thank you for presenting, Annalise. And that's it from me. I look forward to the next one. I was about to say, sorry, I possibly have a little bit of an update on Noni for anyone who's interested in chatting just for 5 minutes about that. Just an update on how the verification study is going. But
Yes, Scott.
I'll give others the floor first. Thanks, Sam. Yeah.
Thank you.
Max,
thanks
sorry.
very much. So basically we can end the meeting, and those who are interested can stay behind in order to discuss Noni, right?
Yeah, if that's okay, if people.
Okay, excellent.
Okay, just before we end, I just wanted to thank everybody. It was a pleasure seeing you all. This looks like a very valuable program, and and I hope that it is a benefit to you. And with that, I will let Scott talk to you about Noni, and I will disappear.
And thank you very much, Ken, again, on behalf of everybody, really, for the support provided by the US Codex Contact Point for this initiative, and really looking forward to continuing our collaboration with everybody. Yeah, and after Noni, Scott's going to respond to an email I sent him last week. So, and this is being recorded, so there is a record. I've got it on record. Yeah. All right. Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks very much. And Susanna sends her apologies because she has an unstable network and she's indicating that the time and the date of the meeting are acceptable. So this is great. Thank you. So thank you, everybody. I'm going to stop the recording right now. Wishing you a great continuation of the day. Great afternoon, everybody, wherever you are. And we'll definitely meet back on the 26th at 9 a.m. Canberra time. Thank you.